I was in business for a long time with a boyfriend who was a fairly abusive person. So that was like disaster.
The world is obsessed with fast-track success. It's easy to think that people become successful overnight. But let's face it, more often than not, what we see on social media is total BS. I'm here to look past the perception of perfect success and focus on life's detours, perceived mistakes, and even wrong choices, and understand the real road traveled up the career ladder. After all, we're all effing up. Natalie Ferguson caught the entrepreneurial bug at university, and at 19, she embarked on her first venture. 2 decades on, Natalie has experienced multiple successful exits, a few painful failures, and everything in between. Before it was acquired in 2021, she grew her last startup, Hatch, into a thriving investing platform with nearly 200,000 customers. Now she's immersed in launching Powrsuit, a leadership platform for women. Natalie, I'm so excited to have you on Effing Up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I always like to start from the very beginning. When you think back, is there an experience or a theme, something that your parents or whoever raised you set within you that you think about and tie to how your career has gone, good, bad, or indifferent?
There's probably a couple of things. My dad was in the military, so I moved around an awful lot as a child. That was 4 schools in 3 places in 4 years. At one stage, I was in a relatively small country school, and I went to a totally different city to an intermediate school, and girls were awful. I remember going on a school camp and they did the thing where they whispered and ran off and left me alone in this like little forest. But I had this teacher who said, because of course she found me crying, and she just said, there's 2 types of people in the world. There's the people who will try and hurt others, and then there's the people like you who will always be really kind. And just remember, you need to find your kind friends. And then the next year, I had to go to high school. There were a huge amount of challenges, and I just remember thinking at the time, yes, I can fit in anywhere. Like I've built these really great skills that I can make friends and I can jump into things and I can put myself out there and put my hand up for everything, but it's exhausting and it doesn't mean you always like people. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is my mum is an incredible entrepreneur, and part of dad's career meant that she could never really hold down a career because they were always moving. Like they've lived in Singapore and Malaysia, and we lived in Alabama at one stage. And she always found opportunities to add value. So she worked at refugee camps. She taught ESOL. She would get us when we were kids making Easter eggs and selling them. Having a mum role model, that real capability and self-reliance and ability to find interesting things to do, and the expectation that we did it, was incredibly powerful. So those things I think really shaped how I ended up, probably more than most things.
Wow, that's fascinating. I want to go back to Natalie left alone in the woods by the secret telling girls. When you regurgitated that and you were telling that story, what came up for you? What feelings?
Oh, I just remember that was 3 years of absolute overwhelm, of never quite fitting in. And so I feel like I remember that exact moment feeling absolutely devastated. But one of the things that I think I'd somehow learned along the way is a real sense of self. So part of me was devastated, but I don't think I was devastated because I felt I was the problem. I was devastated because I felt, how am I going to make friends with people like this? Like, how am I going to build a community? I
There's
probably
no
didn't think about
optionality.
it.
Yeah. Did you have thoughts about what you might do with your life beyond high school?
I actually had always wanted to be a vet. I loved animals, and I, for some reason, equated that to getting into medicine. So I spent a bit of time at the local vet clinic during high school. And after fainting a couple of times, realized that maybe it wasn't the right career for me. So that was a pretty, when you spent your entire childhood naively thinking I've got my whole future planned out, and then very quickly find out that you don't at all. So I left high school with very little idea of what I wanted to do. Neither of my parents had been to university. They felt like it was a massive opportunity for us and a real privilege and a gift that we were able to go. And in New Zealand, we have publicly funded a lot of our university. I think the government covers a lot of it, and we get interest-free student loans. So for me going, it was about $4,000 or $5,000 a year. Like it was, and on an interest-free loan that I could pay back over a long time. So it made the equation make a lot more sense to go. I hated it. I really didn't like it because I think I'd had such a great high school. And then I was back to having to repeat word for word what some old dude wrote in a book 10 years ago. And I think it's really important to learn off other people, but it wasn't really challenging. Yeah, and I didn't really find the things that I like to do. So I left after 2.5 years with a degree in business. But during that time, I had gone from being really, because we were around when the internet wasn't really around and we didn't have, and so I'd gone from being really like, oh, computers, lame. And somewhere along the line at university started to go, oh, this is interesting. I can communicate. I loved writing and I always did really well at English. So I started a blog before I realized it was a blog. I created my own website and built it in HTML and started writing on it and published it to the world and just learned those mechanics, and then started getting really interested in some of the design tools at the time because I always loved drawing and art. And so I started creating like logos and working for different organizations for free and just saying, I want to practice doing this. Can I do this? Can I draw this? Can I design this? And so by the time I left university, I actually had a design business almost set up. And in a couple of months after that, I was earning next to nothing, but no one does straight out of university. I cold called a few people and cold emailed and signed up some website work. That was at a time where you had to build a website from scratch and no one was talking about, they still had what they called splash pages where you had to click to get out of this ugly page to even get into the website. And I really cared about websites that people could use. And now it's obviously morphed into the UX industry. But at the time I was like, why can't we have websites that actually add value and help me get where I need to go? So I just did it without a plan, really.
Did you feel any sort of way about not having, I'm using air quotes here, but like an official job that you were headed toward that wasn't something that kind of just came to be? I'm maybe having trouble articulating this question, but I think some people might take that and be like, oh, I have a business. Awesome. Let me roll with it. And then some people might be like, I have a business. Cool. But look at Tommy, look at Jill, like their merchandising, their marketing, whatever their roles are. And it just feels so official and put together. And mine just feels like it happened to be. What camp were you in, or were you a little of both?
I was probably very oblivious. I have realized now, and I didn't know this at the time, that freedom and control over my life were always incredibly important values to me. So the idea of signing up for a job was never attractive to me, actually. And I've actually never really had a job. I had about a year of paid employment when our last company got acquired.
You have to rephrase that. It's not that you haven't had a job. You haven't had
I haven't
a job
worked for
working
anyone
for
else.
someone else.
Yeah.
Better. What are we about to hear here?
Yeah, she's just relaxed her whole life. No, I've never worked for someone else, which and that now feels like probably a subconscious choice. But no, at the time, I think I was having fun and I was liked creating something from nothing. Like I get a real kick out of this whole end-to-end thing that just happened was all me. Like the sales was me, the design was me, the relationship management was me, the accounting was me. Like I've realized that's something that brings me a lot of joy. But there was a lot of pushback. Like I also knew I was young and I had time, but definitely, I know at one stage my mum said, could you just get a job at a retail store like your sister? And I knew that came from a place of concern. She wanted to make sure that I was going to not make stupid decisions. And this was the beginning of really the internet. It was 2000 odd. So like the .com happened. And I think she was a bit like, what are you doing?
Is this a cute phase? What are you doing here? Yeah.
But then as things started to pick up, I think the challenge is they never really understood what it is. But as things started to pay off, I think they started to get it. Yeah, that was probably it. Honestly, I don't think I really thought about it too much. It all exploded pretty quickly, which is probably the next thing is I was in business for a long time with a boyfriend who was a fairly abusive person. So that was like disaster.
Okay, let's go into that.
Why am I laughing? It's not funny.
It's your coping mechanism.
Yeah, it is. It is. I actually went to therapy about it years later when I was having panic attacks. And my therapist said, "Did you notice that every time you talk about this, you laugh?" And I was like, "No." And she's, "Let's dig into that." So
I was like, "You're laughing again. Dig deeper."
Yeah, yeah. So I was 18. I met him in a bar, and I was naive. I'd only met great people, really. And he was a narcissist. My therapist said he was a narcissist based on his behavior, which very quickly morphed from the sort of love bombing, the selling the dream, into smaller digs, bigger digs, trying to cut me off from everyone, succeeding in cutting me off from everyone, undermining every single thing that I did, and some pretty horrible situations and pretty soul destroying. Like, I was a shell of myself for most of my 20s with that. And we also happened to have started a startup together, which had some fairly influential people investing in it or advising us who, again, this is early 2000s. No one understood coercive control. No one understood the challenges women faced. I don't even know how many women there were in technology in New Zealand at the time. And so they had no comprehension of what I was going through. It was ridiculous looking back now. And actually, I've had some conversations recently with people who've been pretty upset and said they've carried this guilt for a very long time about not seeing what was happening right under their nose and enabling it, because they said at the time, because of course he painted me out to be the crazy one, that it just didn't fit right, but they didn't do anything. And I was in office spaces at the time with him yelling, literally yelling at me and not letting me leave my desk without it being a massive problem. And people just were like, "Oh, you two are having a few challenges." And so there was a lot of gaslighting in a way from the community who didn't get it and who saw it as couples problems. And I'd actually broken up with him by this point, but I didn't know how to unmerge a business at 23. It was pretty awful.
That is awful. How long did you continue to work together?
At this stage, we had two businesses. So I'd come back, we were living up north, and I'd decided to come home. Again, my wonderful mother, at one point I'd pop back for her birthday and she just said, "Come and live with me, come home. I will do anything to get you out of that situation." And that is a big lesson for anyone in that situation. Offer them an alternative plan, because when you're that deep in it, it's almost impossible to find a path out. And so just having someone present on a plate, "This is the plan for you," was exceptionally helpful. But of course, he followed me back. And we had the design business and the startup. So I just said, "I'm going to take the design business. I'm going to walk away from the startup." But of course, it was never that simple, because this was a mechanism of control. And so I ended up having to turn up to a law firm with one of my high school friends at 23 and walk into this group of middle-aged men lawyers who I had met I'd been introduced via a high school friend who we debated with. And they just see this 23-year-old turn up in a real state. And I knew that they were thinking, "Come on, your boyfriend broke up with you. Don't be so silly." And then, of course, they spoke to him and I got a call and she just said, "I'm so sorry. We will take this on. We will need a team to take this on." And then it took about a year and about $100,000 to get rid of him, and legal fees and costs. And my lawyers were amazing. They just said, "Don't read anything he sends. Our job is to protect you from this. Don't engage, don't," like, they did a fantastic job once they figured it out. And I also had some fantastic friends, and because this guy was still trying to contact everyone I know, he had friends ringing me telling me that I was being stupid. It was all encompassing. It was, I could not escape it. I don't really think about it often. And I did a talk a while ago, and because this is part of my story, I raised it and I burst into tears on the stage. And I was like, "Gosh, this is 20 years on, and sometimes talking about it still just gets you going."
Yeah. You said this occupied most of your 20s, which is a huge chunk of time. And it sounds like pretty stressful. You had to be in defense mode or offense mode, probably oscillating from one to the other way too
And I think
frequently,
because of the
way too
financial
frequently.
side as well. Like, I was running a business that he was undermining because he wanted to, like, so he was contacting my customers. He was trying to drag it out and all of that stuff. So my livelihood and my ability to support myself was also under threat, as well as having to deal with this, as well as having just the combined social connections who all for a long time were convinced I was the crazy one. And so it really impacted my career early on. It really made me very scared of my reputation, how I was perceived, who I could trust. Yeah, it was pretty hard. Yeah.
You mentioned that tech in New Zealand is, I don't remember what words you said. It's like a smaller community. And so I'm curious if you've ended up having to cross paths with this individual again or associates.
Yes and no. I still had shares in the startup for a couple of years. If you know anything about narcissism, you know that they actually cause havoc across a huge array of things. Obviously, as I left, the challenges started to be much more apparent to other people. And I don't know for sure, but there was a reason why there was a bunch of our shareholders at the time who were directors of other companies suddenly had a pressing need to leave and for us to sell our shares. And that was probably the last time I had to really pay attention to it. And I remember I was so angry because I'd spent all this time trying to, as calmly as I could, explain the real situation to them. And they hadn't believed me. And now they were coming to me for a favor to protect them. But I fortunately had this very good friend at the time who I've relied on him for a lot of time. He's a very experienced negotiator. And he just took over the negotiations for me. He just said, you don't need to deal with this. I find it fun. I'm going to sort that out. There was nothing really left of the business. And that was the final getting out of it. And honestly, after that, his reputation was pretty muddy here. And I'm sure there's more people, always a never ending pile of people who fall for it initially, but I don't know of anyone I know who would have any time for him anymore because he's burnt bridges along the way. So, but it was a long time. 18 to like 26-ish was like the full extent of how long I had to deal with him. And that's a long time.
That's a long time. Yeah. And when was it that from 18 to 26, when was it that you started going down the road with lawyers and whatnot?
I think it was about 23. So I'd broken up with him probably about a year before. But then even after that, that was at least a year of that. And then, of course, you've always got the remaining payments. And fortunately, I was really smart for a young, overwhelmed person. And I paid him out over a couple of years because I knew that while I had to pay him money out of the business, I could control his behavior to a degree. If he broke any of the rules that the lawyers had agreed on, I could stop the payment. So it bought me that time, but it meant that every month I had to send him money because I was buying him out of the business, which of course I'd grown in the time of the legal court case. So I had to pay him more. But so that, and then, so it was a long, prolonged time. And I think I've heard this for a lot of people, and I think we struggle to see it in day-to-day life, but the leaving part is actually just the beginning of a whole new part with people in narcissists and abusive people. It's not the end. It's a really hard beginning.
Did it affect your trust as you continued through life when you encountered new people?
Strangely, no. But what it did do, it's almost like those girls in intermediate school, it made me disappointed in how other people respond. Like, I can't fix him and I don't want to, and I have no time in my brain. But it actually just makes you realize, like, most people, I was so lucky. I had some people who really stepped up, like the friend who wrangled the lawyers. Like, I didn't do that. I was crying on her bed and I'm just going to do this. I had other friends who just stepped in. My boyfriend at the time turned up at my office every night to walk me out and said, I will take the hits. So that it's crazy what people did. But there were other people that I was like, okay. And it's not that they're disappointing. It's just that you realize people don't understand a lot of tough things other people go through, and you can't expect them to. And so you can't take it personally and realize that, which I think probably feeds into why I think it's really important to have your people, because those are the people who do drop everything.
Would you describe yourself as a serial founder? How do you classify yourself?
Probably now I do, and mainly just because I think a lot about personal branding because I didn't do it for so long. And so every time I start a new company or I'm involved or a co-founder of a new company, I'm starting from scratch and proving myself again. So I feel like now with a couple of successes behind me and this really great life of starting different companies, I feel like I've earned the right to say, yes, I have started. And actually now I see it paying off, like starting Powrsuit. I'm like, the skills I've built make starting a company so much easier. I really feel for people doing it first time, because the overwhelming amount of stuff you need to learn across an entire business makes it an incredibly hard thing. So
Yeah.
I feel like one of the joys of being a serial founder is I've learned them bit by bit when these incredible founding teams along the way. Now I'm pretty know the mechanics of how to set something up.
For every guest, I build a timeline in their LinkedIn, and this is
Oh my
what
goodness.
yours looks like.
Wow.
And I found yours to be one of the more just visually confusing is not the right word because that has a negative connotation. But there were lots of overlapping things because you were starting businesses upon running businesses, upon you're a co-founder. And I'm curious how that's felt along the way. Has it felt disordinate to you? Have you felt overstacked? Or is it just a visual thing and it didn't play out like that in practicality?
It may mean that I need to update my LinkedIn. No,
No.
it was actually a deliberate strategy. I had this plan with the design agency to grow that to 10 people and hire in a manager, and that would give me the freedom to be able to build startups. So for me, that agency funded my ability to do stuff on the side. So even as we got to about 5 people and I realized there was not a chance that it was going to be as simple as just bringing someone else in to run the business. Again, I was still very young. I started to realize, okay, so I can use this, and I know a lot of companies do it, use the services business to fund the product business. So if I want to participate in startups, or I had a design team who could actually help do the design, or I could free up some time to be able to not work in the design business. So that's why a lot of the crossover is that there was this whole thing that was happening that allowed me to step out and do other things. And I kept that philosophy. So I wound down the design business because I had a young team and I realized I was spending more and more time managing people, less and less time doing the stuff that I loved. And the only reason in the end I had it was ego. I was like, it's so fun to be able to be in your 20s being like, I have this team and I own this business. And I was like, oh my goodness, the price of doing that is like too high. So as people left to go and travel and do all sorts of great stuff, I just stopped rehiring people. And that allowed me then as a consultant and freelancer to then really have control over my time and have one mouth to feed. So bring in enough money that allowed me to start really cool businesses. And most of those businesses were started with a morphing group of different people and connections in the industry that I really liked. And we just had a lot of fun trying different things. And everyone was, sometimes there was one person working full time, often it was a bunch of us working part time. It changed depending on the business.
What has been the top few most challenging things that you've encountered as you've co-founded businesses?
Money.
Like having to raise money, keep
Yeah,
money, the
well,
whole thing?
I'm normally bootstrapped, and that's probably like rare these days now, because I think there
Yeah.
was over the last 10 years we've gone into this sort of VC funnel. But we tended to bootstrap or fund it a little bit ourselves. And so then you're always making compromises. I love bootstrapping, but that means that you're always compromising on money or like on time. So that was probably a big one. I think there's also the passion thing. There are some great problems to solve in the world. Some of the startups, like for example, the My Tours, which we were acquired by a US company actually a few years ago, that was at the rise of iPhones and these galleries and museums. Remember they used to have those clunky handsets when you wanted to do a tour? And so we could replace that with almost like a white labelable app that allowed you to build your own tour. Amazing. It wasn't my passion. The CEO, this was his dream. I realized partway through that I was more distracted by other things. It's really fun to do it, but then you're like, is this what I want my life's work to be? And turns out not always.
Yeah, I guess there's the person who can be pretty product agnostic, and then there's the person that has to really be bought in to what it is. I have gone back and forth on what I think I am, and I think it depends.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it does because I'm happy contributing if it's product agnostic. Like I'm
Mm.
happy building great, cool things. But if I'm going to dedicate all my energy and enthusiasm and thoughts to the thing, the easiest way to do that is if you wake up every day extremely driven to solve that problem. And so I think it's just a matter of how much effort you're willing to put in, depending on
Yeah.
the scenario. If you are a purpose or values driven person, then it's actually okay to say not every organization is the right organization. That doesn't make them a bad organization. Different people are drawn to different things, and that's what makes the world so amazing. But if you're not, that's actually okay.
Talk to me about Hatch. It's my understanding that you exited that, and I'm curious what that experience was like.
I think that this is a really great follow on from what we just talked about with purpose and vision. I build these things because I really believe in it. And Hatch was one that I really believed in. It was an investing platform, but actually it was a wealth building platform. In New Zealand, we didn't have access to a lot of investing options. We were the first to open access to the US share markets. Before that, it was about $100 in a trade in fees. And we actually had a substantial change on the wealth landscape of New Zealand. We had people who took control of their money, and that leads to like massive life-changing decisions. If you start investing and you follow very basic principles, you can take control of your life in a way you haven't been able to before. So that's what we were waking up every day to do. And you can probably tell how passionate I am about that. That is a meaningful company. However, in order to grow, we needed to get access to different investment opportunities. And the financial industry is so hard. It's so backwards. It's so manual. It's so expensive. It's so clunky. And so it turns out that the only way we really could make progress beyond where we were was to just stay really specialized in a tiny market. New Zealand's got 5 million people. You cannot really build a huge business without going a bit more general or to be acquired. That's probably the first part is I think if it was an option, we'd probably have rather stayed doing what we were doing, but we realized there was an end in sight or just a point that we would hit the maximum we could get to. When you get acquired, it's now someone else's business. And so you go from, I've talked about freedom and autonomy and control over my decisions being really important to me. And it doesn't really matter if they have an equally as powerful vision or a really cool way of what they want to do with your company. If it's not yours, it just feels like you've lost something. I know that probably sounds really naive, but I think up until then, I genuinely thought people bought companies because they thought they were doing really good and that they wanted to keep that going.
That they weren't going to strip it for parts.
Yeah, or that they didn't have a pivot in mind that fit their business strategy, which of course makes total sense. And on reflection, I'm like, duh. But I found it a real challenge. Also, massive culture difference. You've built this incredible culture, and everyone thinks they've got an incredible culture or a playbook for how they work. And when they are big and you are little, the expectation is you conform to their culture. And that's a seismic shift when you have spent a couple of years building a really, really solid way of working. So I floundered. Is actually, we're doing a talk soon about the syndroming of women, and imposter syndrome is something I really rail against these days because we're not broken. Like, I'm not an imposter. I can stretch myself. I can be alone in situations or the first or only, but I'm not the imposter. But that was when I felt it. Like, I was in this room with men in suits who all had Rolexes and looked so slick and talked in acronyms. And I just started being like, sorry, dumb question. And my co-founder, Kristen, pulled me aside and was like, you never ask dumb questions. No one ever knows the answers to your questions. Stop saying dumb questions. And so I just found like the whole thing. And fortunately, we decided for our team, we wanted to give them a fair few months to get set up and to make sure that they were set up for success or had time to leave if that's what they wanted. And then we effectively walked away from a lot of money and backed ourselves to start again because those lock-ins and the structures they set up incentivize you to stay longer.
Yeah.
And we were just like, nah, life is short. We have 120. I plan to live for 120 years. I have 120 years. I'm not spending a minute of it more working in a place that doesn't, like, when it doesn't bring me joy.
That is so refreshing and so inspiring because I have talked to countless people who take the stance of I'm locked up, and it's this waterfall lockup where, you know, like each year I get more if I stay. And so it makes it harder the next year. And I'm like, you're literally talking yourself out of this. You're
Yeah.
miserable and you're convincing yourself that miserable is okay for what? Money now, regret later? Not
Yeah.
cool. Get out. So the fact that you were like, nah, we're walking away. And I've been on the other side of this where I've tried to retain people and I know what those retainers look like. They can be
Mm.
quite sexy.
Mm.
And to think that you said, not sexy enough for my mental well-being and for where I want to be. Again, their prerogative. It's their company. They can do what they want now, but that doesn't mean that you have to like it.
No. And actually it's funny you say you've had those conversations because I had to have them. Like it wasn't as straightforward as me going, I am valuing this. I had a leadership coach at the time, and my proposition to her was that I was going to spend the next 6 months in therapy because I was in a relationship. I wasn't happy. Like it was fine, but it wasn't serving me. And I was looking forward at years of this organization that I didn't really fit into. And she just said, or you could quit your job and break up with your boyfriend. And I was like, what? You can just do that? So often it actually does take, it's what I said before, it takes someone else sometimes presenting you a different option when you're in the middle of it. And so actually it was a pretty quick turnaround from there. But I do get it. And I'm very fortunate in that I am a serial entrepreneur and I have invested my whole life. So I have a huge financial safety net that enables me, which is exactly why I loved doing Hatch, because the bigger your financial safety net, the more freedom over your life you get. And so that enabled me to go, yep, that money is very attractive. Part of it was that I was spending a lot of it on desperately trying to stay happy. You end up like spending money on stupid stuff because you're like, maybe if I go on this glamorous holiday, it'll make me feel better. Or maybe if I do this, it'll
Right.
make me feel better. And it never really does. And then
No,
the other big area,
temporary is temporary.
yeah, and I was also worried about what people would think because I remember really delaying calling my mum to be like, you finally get what I do. Like, I'm finally in a corporate, earning a corporate salary and all of the stuff that feels like what it should be and it's easy. And I thought she was going to be like, what are you doing? But she literally replied to my text with finally. And so I was like,
Oh,
no, it felt, and that
that's
all picked up
incredible.
on changes.
Okay, wait. I just realized you have had a real job where you work for someone. This brief
That was
period.
it. That was my real
That
job.
was
I
it.
did it for
Yeah.
about six
And it was
months.
terrible. Lesson learned. You're out. Incredible. Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective for someone to have who's working on building a business or has desires to build a business and kind of breaking down the fourth wall. It may be wonderful if you could acquire it, but it also may be terrible. As an HR leader, the thing I absolutely hate the most is, yeah, there are going to be some changes, but don't worry. Culture is going to be just fine. It's going to be exactly the same. What? No, never. It
No.
will never, ever be the same. Culture today, even if we don't get acquired, if we're the same company, if we add 30 bodies, might not be the same after 30 bodies. This is the reality of life, the change inevitable, and you never know what's going to come with it. And
Yeah.
that message that everything's going to be fine, come on, you're setting these people up for complete failure.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think now, once you spot a yellow car, you see them everywhere. Now, of
Yeah.
course, I've spoken to a bunch of other people like you, and everyone's got a pretty consistent story. It's just that for some reason we never hear about it.
Yeah, well, it does sound pretty sexy when you start thinking about a company getting bought or going public. And the idea of a money inflow really blinds people. Money is a wonderful yet terrifying thing. It
Yeah.
can have a lot of power in good and bad ways.
And I think to your point before about people who feel locked in, is you can go, "Oh, I just need to do it for 2 years." And
Mm,
I don't know, I'm 40 now, and I feel like I've met enough people who have had a real health scare or something changed dramatically in their life that I just think 2 years is an awful long
it's
time to
such
feel.
a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing people will say is, yeah, I don't love this job. I can see myself. It's the jumping point to that next thing. And so I'm just going to do it. Maybe it's the jumping point, or it might
Yeah.
not be at all. To your point,
Yeah.
something might happen or not happen. You just never know. So
Yeah.
you want to be miserable now? God, life is so short. Anyway, we're getting on some other,
Oh, no, I totally agree with you. And I think it's a message that we should all keep repeating.
for sure. Yeah. Okay, so you got out of there, and is that when
you got the idea to start Powrsuit? How did that come to be?
Yeah, we didn't feel like our mission was complete. This idea of financial empowerment and being able to live your life on your terms. We'd seen traction and we'd seen we could do that, and we'd built a lot of capability in that area. So we actually were going to go down a different path because financial services are so hard, so much regulations, incredibly difficult, and we'd learned it. So we were like, let's start a fund, and let's start a fund that invests in companies with women leaders, and they need to have a diverse board, and they need to be of a certain valuation to make them pretty financially stable, and we'll go to all the share markets in all the world and we'll pull them together. And that was going to solve two things. Women tend to start investing and get interested in it when there's a purpose, not just a financial return. And that felt like we like to back women. And so that was cool. And women-led companies tend to outperform. So we were like, well, let's do it. And looked around and analyzed all the different companies that fit our criteria. And I think there was 156 of all the tens of thousands of companies.
Wow.
So it was a non-starter. And we realized that was the problem to solve. It is outrageous. At that time, it was probably the end of 2022. It was outrageous to us that we had quietly been going about a financial revolution for the last 5 years. We'd seen dramatic social change, and the gender leadership gap had gone backwards. And I think we, like many others, had been under this illusion that things were happening and it was slowly closing on its own. And it's not. I think they still have estimates of about 138 years to close it. And what we found really interesting is what we found at Hatch too, is timing is so important in a startup. And people often say people who start these incredible businesses are geniuses, but often there is a mixture of trying really hard and not giving up, and timing are huge factors in it. And we'd just come out of COVID. We'd seen the switch to hybrid and remote work, and we'd seen CEOs really floundering with how they measure productivity and how they understand what work looks like. We're seeing AI launch out of movie scripts and into our daily lives. We've seen, like, even building Powrsuit, automation making it business so different. We've got climate change. We're going into economic hard times. And it just became obvious to us that the style of leader we need now is so fundamentally different to the style of leader we've needed in the past. And also, for the first time ever, businesses recognize that because they're looking at all the evidence, and diverse leadership teams outperform. And they need that thinking to go forward in a knowledge economy. And they don't know how to solve the problem. Like, they're looking at top line stats around how many women in our leadership team, but they're not cracking it, and they're not understanding what is the things that's stopping women getting there and staying there. How do we build more robust pipelines? It's actually now a business critical issue for smart organizations. And in the meantime, we started talking to a bunch of women, and they said, I don't want to be in the senior leadership team. Why would I ever want to be a CEO? Have you seen the amount of sacrifice I would need to take? I wouldn't see my children. I would be stressed. My mental health would suffer. This system is not designed for that to be an attractive option for me. And so those two factors, we just went, there are so many hidden barriers here that no one's talking about. So let's start talking about them, and let's take every myth we hear about women being the problem and challenge those myths and turn it around and go, what are the systemic issues that actually lead to that behavior? Does that behavior actually even exist? How do we start to take this big complex issue and break it down into the stuff we know really well? Behavior change, small habits that work, systemic change from the inside. And so we launched Powrsuit to do exactly that.
I'm curious what opposition you encounter.
So a couple of things. First, the biggest challenge and pushback we had early on is, what about the men? And I found that really fascinating. And I actually had someone come over to fit an aircon
I think
here,
I
and
asked you that too, actually.
yeah. And he said, when I said we were building a platform to close the gender leadership gap, he said, you must be helping men. And I actually think one of the biggest barriers we have is that, like I did, we all think this problem has been solved. And we see all these women's initiatives, and I think quite rightly, men feel like, what about us? But the stats don't align with that. The problem hasn't been solved in any way. And so we have an allies cohort, and we've got about 50 men on board, and that's a Powrsuit light, effectively. Our goal is once a month to bring in an incredible expert leader, someone who really thinks differently about this stuff, and create an incredibly safe space for allies or want to be allies to have conversations that really help them foster inclusive leadership. One of the biggest challenges I think we have today is women are quite rightly tired and frustrated and sick of men asking dumb questions. Men are still at the very early stages of this journey in a lot of cases. And if they're in an environment where they can't do anything right, it is really off-putting. It's like we all feel the same, right? If it was a challenge that we were learning about. So I get that. And so for us, we've gone, if you are a woman leader who wants to opt into this group, you only get one part of that space, but you have to come in recognizing that someone might ask a question that feels really dumb to you, but they're actually asking it genuinely, and you are not going to support them if you rip into them. So you actually have to abide by the set of rules. And we're early stages in that group, but we really want to foster that environment. So we had our first interview with this incredible male leader from a global tech company. And it was really interesting afterwards because I think they were a little bit scared going in, and then they came out and we got emails from this group being like, wow, he was phenomenal. And we noticed a bunch of men start to sign up, and we're like, they've gone away going, this is cool. This feels like a place I can come and think about this. So that's one of the big oppositions we've had. The other one is, does it work? And I think this is a real challenge, as we've spent 10 years with all these initiatives that were meant to help, and they haven't moved the needle at all. And we're now in an economic downturn, and businesses need to show a return on investment. So we are measuring, we're a data-led company. So we are about to release our first quarterly insight and impact report that really sheds a light on the different experiences our members have at work. So one example is, I think it's about 60% of men think that the non-promotable work is shared equally amongst everyone in the office. And I think about 5% of women. And so these working in the same offices, right? So there are some invisible differences there, all the way through to the impacts of some of the training we've done on ability to negotiate, ability to give feedback, all of those tangible skills. We can track the difference we make in that. But I think it's a good challenge.
What keeps you up at night in regards to your work?
Money is always, it's very uncomfortable going from earning a salary back to bootstrapping. And we're not doing side work. We are earning money through Powrsuit. And while I have a massive financial safety net that I've built, and I have to be clear about that because it does make my situation feel very different from someone who is like really on a runway, it's very uncomfortable to go weeks without earning any money. It's something that goes through cycles of being very uncomfortable and playing on my mind. I think the other thing that keeps me up at night is my brain, because this week, for example, I think I'm speaking at 3 or 4 events. We're doing this podcast. We're running our own masterclass today. One of them's on stage where I'm like, oh no, we have to really be tight on our points. And I haven't really had a chance to figure out. We're just figuring out what we're saying. So you go to bed and your brain is, and so I have to learn really good tactics to calm it and get some sleep.
Ooh, that's tough. How does stress manifest for you?
Again, with this exceptional leadership coach I had a few years ago, she asked the question in a different way. And she just said, what are the 3 things that fall apart when your life is not looking good? And I was like, I stop eating healthy, my house becomes a mess, and I stop exercising. And she said, those are the 3 things you need to do to make sure you don't get stressed, because they're actually the things that help you rather than the things that fall apart. And that was such a light bulb for me. I think I also start to feel really, what's that feeling? It's overwhelm and it's grind to a halt. You hit this point where you can't actually do anything because you feel like you've got too much to do and you become wildly inefficient. Yeah, I think I probably go a bit quiet as well.
Looking back at your career, what was the lowest point?
Oh, I think it was definitely during my 20s. I thought I had an idea of what depression or feeling down felt like, but it actually feels much closer to exhaustion. Just this idea of I just want everything to stop. Like that was a really weird realization of going through days and days of just being like, how do you just stop everything?
I have some rapid fire questions. What is the key thing in your career that made you feel like this podcast was a good idea?
I think it's that I have got so much benefit from learning about other people's mistakes and the real gritty truth behind the glossy stories that I want to model and encourage this to be a normal way we communicate. I'm sick of hearing happy, glamorous stories that don't stack up all the time.
How do you define success?
Happiness. And maybe contentment, because I don't think you can be happy all the time.
Do you feel successful?
Yeah, I am very happy most of the time and very contented. And I have like I used to think, so now I'm not rapid fire, but I used to be single for a long time. And so many people I knew looked at me like, you poor thing, you'll find someone eventually. And I was like, I am so much happier than all of you. Like, why would I want to get what you've got? And now I'm in a fantastic relationship and incredibly happy, and we have a wonderful time together. But what is it? What you measure, you achieve. And because I have focused for a very long time on happiness, it really makes making decisions a lot easier.
What 3 words would you use to describe your career?
Varied, bold, and meaningful.
What I was going to ask this. I have 3 labels: love, ultimate fun, skip. And I'd like you to choose 3 of your job experiences and apply the label to them.
I would say Powrsuit is love. Hatch was ultimate fun. We had so much fun together. We had a blast.
Oh, that's cool.
Probably the first one.
I so appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun.
Amazing. And vice versa. If you ever need anything, we're right here.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Effing Up. I'm your host, Deanne Reiner. If you enjoyed today's episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe on the platform you use to listen to podcasts. Share Effing Up with others, post about it on social media, and/or leave a rating and review. Until next time, count your perceived failures as part of your path to success. After all, we're all effing up.